Hi, everyone. This is Ken Reed, and I'm here with Alex Paradies. And we're going to have just a very quick session here, talking a little bit about on TapRooT TV here, discussing a little bit concerning how you talk to your employees and how do you get your point across. And we had a great example that you've probably seen in the news recently, and we just thought it had some really good learnings that we thought would be something that we could discuss.
Yeah, so I'll go on, jump right into it. So Tom Cruise's COVID rant.
Tom Cruise.
when I mentioned this rant to you, what did you say to me, Ken?
Yeah, your initial thought is, quite honestly, I get kind of tired of worrying about what Hollywood actors or actresses think sometimes. I have some other things that I need to worry about besides some of the histrionics and.
So that was my thought exactly too. What do we care about what a Hollywood guy on set is doing, yelling at a busboy or something, And so, but I actually listened to the rant, and it made me start thinking about those times that people are dealing with super life-threatening tasks, and they're dealing with employees that are not following the standards they put in place.
Right. Or even if it's not fully life-threatening, but it is something that's deeply important to them.
A deeply important standard. And listening to that rant, I heard a couple things from Tom that I thought, this would be an interesting discussion to think about. So, for those who haven't heard Tom's COVID rant, essentially we had two people on the film set who were not following COVID social distancing practices that they had in place to keep the movie operational.
And they had a lot of requirements that were put on them in order to keep the set running by their insurance agents and by, just the general industry in order to allow them to continue to follow these requirements.
Yep. So the rant was recorded when Tom saw these guys not practicing those social distance, and it set him off. And it was really interesting to hear. If you listen, it's almost visceral. You tighten up and your blood pressure goes up when you listen to somebody getting chewed out.
Yeah, if you want to listen to it, it's very easy to Google and find it. I would caution you on the language if that's something you're sensitive to.
Yep.
So
I thought it was an interesting thing because you hear him, and his big point is he starts off talking about the impact, right? The impact of this is, this movie is affecting not just our movie set, not just our jobs, but it's the industry. It's impacting the industry, and if we're shut down, then everybody's going to be shut down because we're the gold standard. I think that was his saying. We're the gold standard, and it's this behaviors that would get us shut down if we have a problem. So he was very much
framed it, right?
He framed it up. What was the impact of their actions?
He talked about people losing their jobs and not being able to pay for their food in their tables. I mean, that's the emotional impact he was putting in there.
And it made me think back to when I was trained as a manager on how do you reprimand employees and how do you praise employees? What's the appropriate? And I was taught a method called SBI, and it's situation, behavior, and impact. And essentially, you want to, and when you're reprimanding or when you're praising somebody, you want to talk a specific, what was the impact of their behaviors on a specific situation. Right. And you want to be very clear about that so that they can understand and say, hey, these actions that I take, that I have control over, affect the system. So when you're reprimanding, you need to be talking about that situation, behavior, and impact. And he was very much laying out the impact of not following those standards. He then follows up with another thing that I thought was interesting. So he talks about, I want to make sure you understand this. He's like, this is, we're past, I think is what was his phrase? He said, we're past apologies at this point. I don't want to hear you're sorry. This is the behavior. I want you to follow this. Yep. That's it.
That's right.
If you don't, you're fired. There's a zero tolerance. There's not a line. We're not going to have this discussion.
Oh, it was very black and white the entire time. There was no gray area whatsoever in there.
None.
Right?
And I thought that was, he was very specific about this is the action, this is the behavior, this is the line. And then he follows that up with what I think is an important thing, which is, and I trust you guys. I trust you to be here. And while I don't think, and I think we could both agree that this is a good example of reprimanding people.
Right. There's ways of putting the goods and the bads on this thing. There's obviously this is and we can talk about that a little bit. This is probably not the correct venue and the correct method.
No.
However, the pieces of this were pretty well strung together in a way that you would expect it to do it, just not quite the venue.
Yeah. And so what I was always taught is when you're reprimanding, you want to make sure that you're doing it soon after. So if you could do it right there, that would be fine.
He did that.
You want to be very specific. These are the actions.
Yep.
We already need to be clear on this. But you need to be very specific that it's the actions that's wrong, not you as a person. It's not you're an idiot. It's these actions cause these consequences. And we cannot handle and we cannot tolerate these consequences. And then you have to express support, because when you're reprimanding, when you're cutting somebody down, you have to give them the opportunity to come back to the team, come back into the group.
They got to have a path forward.
A path to redemption.
Right? They got to have a path forward.
And so making it clear that this is not about you guys, this is about we have to meet these requirements. There is no wiggle room on this. We can't have this. And so I thought, when I heard this, I heard, this is a person that's really passionate, and they're really they're put at their job is on the line, kind of thing. And that makes me think about a lot of people that were in a lot of industries, safety. If this was two guys and they were sitting up at the top of scaffolding and they weren't wearing their fall protection and they were fooling around, and you're the safety guy on job, I guarantee you there's been guys that have gotten chewed out for not wearing the proper PPE or not following.
Probably almost these exact words.
Probably.
Almost exact same words, talking about insurance and getting home for your families and all that stuff. I mean, all the emotional stuff that was in there bubbled up and boiled over, and it would probably be almost, you could almost substitute a half a dozen words in there, and it would be exactly the response that you may have heard in the past for something similar. And
so I thought that was like a really, it was just an interesting thing that's relatable, but then it made me think about, the bosses I've had in the past. And I think you probably have even more experience with this than me, coming from the Navy.
Yeah.
I've had some bosses that were pretty tough and would yell at a group, but I think you had maybe even more experience than I did.
I mean, it's amazing that the leaders that you respect, and which were most of them. Most of the leaders that I worked under, I had a lot of respect for, and you wanted to work for them. I can think of a couple right off the top of my head that rarely raised their voice. And there was one I remember very specifically that he did raise his voice one time. And it was almost devastating, because you felt like you let the guy down. And he still didn't yell and scream. He wasn't a screamer. But it really made an impact. And he was very clear, almost like this is the action you just did, this is the consequence it has, and this is why we care about it. This is what we want to do to get better at it. So those kind of leaders, having that SBI that you discussed is great. You do also, though, need to present it properly.
Yep.
So it's going to have the right impact. And sometimes some people feel that type of an impact is the way you want to go.
Yeah. And I think there's also a level of the employee too, because if you think, some people shut down when they're yelled at, and some people rise up, and there's the fight or flight. So some people are going to shut off when they're being yelled at, and some people are going to focus in. I know for me, probably the boss that I respect the most, and definitely he was probably, I think, the hardest boss I ever had, but in a good way. He was one of my favorite bosses. He would chew us out if we were wrong. But he didn't do it. He didn't do it when we were in general. He wasn't malicious about it. But if somebody was not holding to their responsibility, he was going to tell you about it.
Right.
And he was passionate about what he did. And there's a lot you can say about those people that were passionate about those things. A lot of times, they're drivers and they get results. Mm-hmm. And so I often go back and forth on: there's definitely a moment for passion. There's definitely a moment for the emotional impact of something.
Right.
But it needs to be rare.
It does. It needs to be rare, and it also it still needs to be moderated.
Yep.
You need to do it smart. That doesn't mean suppress your emotions or have false emotion. But when those emotions are bubbling up, like Tom, obviously they were just it blew up. You still need to have a little bit of character and a little bit of self-control to hold it just enough
Oh yeah.
to make sure that you're respectful, but at the same time, put that passion across so
Yep.
that your employees understand this isn't just some manager saying something that he's required to say. This is a team leader who is trying to get a job done and keep his employees safe and work as a team leader. And all that, there's nothing wrong with having passion and emotion. Perfectly okay, but you can go overboard with it, and you can, like you said, some people are going to respond the wrong way to that.
Yep.
And some of those guys, well, I think we've already heard 5 of those guys have quit. So they've quit. They said we're done with that, and they've quit. Now, that's a shame. They could have been really high-performing guys, and if this had been approached slightly different, maybe they would have stayed and improved instead of quitting.
Yep.
So now I'm not faulting anyone here. This is just a kind of an outside view on this.
Yeah, and it makes me think about that root cause of employee communication needs
That's exactly
improvement.
where it's at. Yeah.
That employee communication of making sure people understand the standards that you have in place. And, I think I was chatting with Mark on this, and he was talking, this is one of those, you've got your negative behavioral enforcement and your positive behavioral enforcement, and this is kind of one of those negative ones. Is if you don't follow the line, what's the impact on the industry?
Yeah.
And then you've got to balance that with the positive impact, and people have to be aware of that positive behavior. If we follow these standards, people don't lose their homes, or if
Right.
these follow these standards, we can go back to work,
Right.
and we can continue doing what we're doing in our industry. And so there's a positive way to praise people for the right actions, and there's a way to reprimand. And I think the biggest thing with reprimanding that is definitely not taking place here is the privacy element of it.
I was going to say the same thing. Yeah, once you put it out in public like that, you've automatically put people on the defensive,
Yep.
and you're now fighting that.
You're shaming them.
Yeah, there's really most people do not respond well to that, and so like you said, some people might try to rise up, but the majority of people respond poorly to that type of a reprimand. So even sometimes, even if it does need to be negative, and even passionately negative, in private is probably a better way to go on that.
Yeah.
So it's a.
So I think if you want to change, if you want to turn around culture, you've got to make those reprimands focused on that action, not the person. You've got to be expressing support, and you've got to be doing it in a way that's, if not personally private, maybe it's private with those, few individuals.
It could be a group, yeah.
That small group, so that you're not reprimanding everybody, you're not embarrassing them. But at the same time, you also need to be doing an equal amount, at least, of public praise for the people that are following the rules.
Right.
And I think so often with audits and with the findings that we find,
It's
when
always
we
negative, isn't it?
it's always the negative side.
It's always negative.
And so you're going to publicly shame people for the negative, and you're never publicly supporting people
That's
and
right.
expressing appreciation for the positive.
Yep.
And so I think that employee communication and thinking about that, not just as these are the standards and we're going to hold to them, or it's your job, which there is moments for that, but these are the standards and we're going to hold to them because we are a type of company that our customers respect, and that's what we're going to hold to. This is our culture and we're proud of it.
And you probably ought to take a look at, again, maybe not in the passion of the moment there, but at some point you need to take a look and understand, why did these guys decide that was okay?
Yep.
Maybe we're not doing as good a job as we thought of enforcing those policies like we thought we were, or holding people accountable properly, and we're waiting until something really bad happens to explode, when we probably could have found the small little pieces all along that we could have been fixing along the way.
It shouldn't be the responsibility of the actor
Of Tom Cruise.
Of Tom Cruise, right? So it shouldn't be just the responsibility of the safety guy to go around
That's
and
right.
catch everybody, or the manager to go around, or the owner of the company to come in and check. It really
That's a
does
culture
need to be,
issue at that point.
It does. And another point that you were kind of making that I was thinking about, I don't know anything of the situation. But we would always want to look at what was the human factors behind why these guys decided to
That's
break
right.
that rule.
It's amazing how many times you go and scream at somebody, or see something that's wrong and want to go reprimand, and then you go take a look and say, gosh, there was no other way to do this.
There's no other way.
I mean, that could have been the boom mic operator and the board operator, and maybe they they maybe only have a 4-foot cord, between them. Those are the kind of things that you need to take a look at and understand.
Or we need to both look at this screen. You need to come over because I can't tell you from six
Right.
meters away what is on that screen.
And yet I'm going to yell at you if you're within 6 feet of each other.
Yeah.
So
hey, do you see in that shot? Is there something down? What do you think about if we change the?
Right, it just can't do that.
It
So
could,
we need to look and see if there's a reason that these guys, who are probably pretty smart guys, I'm assuming they're doing a pretty technical job, why they decided they needed to be violating the 6-foot rule, and we may find during a good analysis that that we as management or as a company or as a whatever is just had not really given them the proper tools to do the job properly.
So I just thought that was an interesting thing to think about when listening to this. I think most people are just more thinking about it from, you've got a guy yelling at some guys on set, and woe is the Hollywood actor who gets to yell at people.
Yeah.
But I just thought, we all deal with, critical tasks. Some of them are in safety that our lives are on the line, and how do we communicate the impact of people's behavior,
Right.
and how do we do that in a way that changes people's behavior?
Right, and not just make them mad and make them quit. That's not
Yep.
helping. So getting that across, and that's always the goal, is getting an effective corrective action in place. So, that's it is pretty interesting watching this, and I'll admit that when I first saw this, I didn't listen to it. I said, I don't need to listen to another guy yelling at somebody, some privileged guy yelling. But the points he was making, very valid points, and it does lead into some pretty neat discussions. So, Good. Well, excellent. Well, thanks, Alex. I thought that was really interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, and we'll probably write some up, maybe a blog article or something to take a look at this. And we'd welcome your feedback. If you guys have some ideas or some thoughts on this, please let us know. You can put them right in the comment section here on the channel here. And once you get the blog article up, you can put them in there too as we discuss it. So.
And as always, like, comment, subscribe, click the notification bell.
Absolutely.
And we'll see you back in the normal TapRooT TV time.
We'll see you. Bye-bye.